was in high school, my grandmother had a habit of spilling water after me whenever I was having an exam or something big like that. And I was terribly annoyed by that kind of behavior because I was in high school and I was thinking, this is ignorant, this is childish, this is superstitious. And now I have different opinion, maybe because my grandmother passed away a few years ago. And I really miss that kind of way in which someone would wish me a good luck. Because that kind of way of wishing a good luck is certain kind of effort put into it and requires specific dedication. You don't do that if you don't love someone very dearly, or if you don't hate someone very intensely, in the cases of throwing curses and witchcraft. Yeah, that's the idea that got me into dealing with snakes, sticks, and shattered mirrors. And I'm sure that you will not like what I'm going to say here today, but that's okay. I will be a Kuhnian, you know, I will throw some bold hypotheses here, and then you can dismantle me during the discussion. Short overview of my presentation. I will talk about common perception of superstition. Everybody hates superstition, and everybody hates superstition so much that we don't have any kind of unified, widely accepted definition of it, and we have a lot of personal opinions that really attack certain parts of superstition they dislike. And I will raise some questions. Is superstition really that bad? Is every kind of superstition bad? Is there any form of superstition that's not that bad? Is superstition always that bad? And I will try to answer some of those questions by instantiating these two things. One of them is primitive tendency called Apophenia, and the other one is the framework called teleosemantics. And in a conclusion, I will tell something about superstition today, how to deal with it, and so on. So here we have some examples of superstition. There are really a lot of examples of superstition. And my favorite one is knocking on wood, because, you know, if something good happened to me, I'm going to knock on wood, so not to jinx that good that happened to me. About the origin of that belief, it's actually an ancient belief about spirits residing high in trees and sleeping, and by knocking on the tree, we will wake those spirits up and they will protect us. Naive we. So yeah, there is a lot of examples of superstition. This is just one short list. What is superstition? I chose Dawkins and Shermer. Dawkins thinks that superstition and pseudoscience keep us from understanding the world. And Shermer thinks superstition is a retreat from reality. Okay, I chose this because this is scientific point of view, but this is actually a scientific point of view, because a scientific point of view is superstition makes people stupid, superstitious people are stupid, they don't use critical thinking, and they obstruct science, and blah, blah, blah. From the other side, Thomas Aquinas and Martin Luther. Aquinas wrote, superstition is a vice contrary to religion by excess, and it denotes undue worship of God or worship of false God. Luther said, superstition is the worship of false God and the departure from the true faith and true trust in God. When people or atheists attack faith and religion, they use a lot of cheap shots, like connecting faith with superstition, and then Church is very keen on to show how superstition is not a true belief. Superstition is something else. True belief is true faith is true faith, and in this sense, we can see that superstition is hated by both sides, scientists and believing people. So nobody, as I told you, likes superstition. But I will try to maybe show what is superstition made of, and I think I'm really uncertain about it. Superstition consists of one primitive tendency or fundamental tendency called apophenia, and one framework, one model called teleosemantics. So I will try to use this teleosemantic framework as a higher level of understanding superstition, and apophenia as a lower level of understanding superstition. And I will use this framework to show how something like apophenia can develop into something more sophisticated, like superstition, magical thinking, and dual thinking. But I will talk about that further on. For now, the keywords are evolutionary mechanisms, patterns, false positives, benefits, biases, costs, and language, behavior, and so on. Finally, some snakes and sticks. On the left side, we can see some sticks, and on the right side, we can see some snakes. They really look alike because all of these are sticks. And they are really gruesome, but there is also explanation why the snakes are really disgusting to us. So let's go to apophenia. What is apophenia? Apophenia is a tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data, seeing meaning where there is none. And origin, derived from cognitive processes, evolved to recognize patterns. Its role, it helps us in making quick decisions in an uncertain situation. An example is mistaking a stick for a snake. So I can see a stick and jump on the curb because I'm thinking that's a snake, and I'm making mistake. I'm making false positive, but that's a better version of situation than false. I'm making false negative. It's better than false positive, because false positive is I'm keeping my cool because I saw a stick, but actually it's a snake. So that's more costly for our survival, especially if the snake is poisonous. There are a lot of studies, like this one, Blaine's, that demonstrate a clear link between apophenia and superstitious beliefs. Individuals with a high tendency to perceive patterns in random data are significantly more likely to hold superstitious beliefs. And these studies show that apophenia is a significant predictor of superstition. How do they do these studies? I participated actually in several studies on apophenia. They give you all sorts of questionnaires on superstition, so answer if you are superstitious in that way or that way. And then they put you in the experimental part of the research. They show you snowy images, and you have to answer, do you see a pattern in it or not? And sometimes there is really a pattern, like house, or and sometimes there is not pattern. And then on a population, on a sample level, they are correlating apophenia with superstitious belief. There are a lot of weird experiments with apophenia. One time I participated in an experiment where they put some electrodes on my finger. They electrified me in order to examine what is my tolerance to pain, what is my threshold to pain. And then they gave me snowy pictures to do it, so apophenia and pain tolerance. But there are interesting research about apophenia. We can do this on individual level, but also on a communal level. I will talk something about this later on, but there are research that show that there is a link between apophenia and this tendency and superstitious beliefs. What is teleosemantics? Teleosemantics actually is a biological model for the origin, for explaining origin of language, and it states that semantic content of our belief can be reduced to biological functions. That means that long time ago, there was a certain trait that was selected because it was useful, it was fulfilling its biological purpose, and that trait persists now because it's fulfilling its historical role. So there is a purpose also for that trait today. So that's the idea of teleosemantics. And I talked about semantic content of belief. Why do we have superstitious belief? There must be a reason for it. If there is no reason for having superstitious belief, then superstitious beliefs wouldn't exist. That's teleosemantics idea. And this is a story actually about epistemic aims. Usually, in most cases, epistemologians think that truth is epistemic goal, and truth is goal for a belief. But according to teleosemantics, epistemic goal is actually survival. Although in 99.999999 cases, truth is something that is very beneficial to us, it's useful for our survival, but there are marginal cases like false positive that are really beneficial for us, but they are false. So, yeah, the general idea was to connect apophenia as primitive tendency to see patterns where there are none, developing something like primitive belief without content, and then trying to follow up on the development to something that is that has some kind of semantic content, and it's more sophisticated, like superstition, magical thinking, and double thinking. For example, magical thinking, in the last 2.5 years, a lot of bad things happened to me, and I must be cursed. So if I'm thinking that way, that's magical thinking. I must be cursed. So that's the idea of the framework for apophenia. But it's interesting because there are studies that are trying to show that apophenia is in the root of causal thinking. If we have two events that co-occur, seeing the link between them is also a root of the tendency, primitive tendency like apophenia. Next one. Okay, here we have a lot of studies that show some benefits on community level, on the individual level, but I will give two examples. One of those is historical and made up, and the other one is the speculative. The first example is Thales, the first philosopher, and the eclipse. So Thales was an astronomy buff, and he foretold, because of his research, that eclipse will happen on a specific day. So we have two armies that were keen on solving their disputes on very bloody way, and they wanted to go to war. And Thales told them that gods will not be happy with it, so they shouldn't do that. And they, of course, didn't listen to Thales. Then they gathered up on a hill, and eclipse actually happened, and they thought that this is really a bad omen, so we should retreat and not kill each other. And that's That's an example where superstition can be beneficial on a social level. And the other case is, speculative. If we have a group of people around us and there are external factors that endanger us, like other people want to do us harm, motivation to protect our fellow man is not really a purity of heart. It's hard to imagine a caveman with a starry sky above him and immoral law in him. There must be some other kind of reasons to do that, and the reasons are, of course, a better chance for survival, and superstition really can glue people in a group and give them some kind of identity, and they will more easily defend themselves from external factors. That's just, two beneficial on a community level examples. And should I be a little superstitious, and can I avoid it? Oh, again, two examples. One of them is typically horror movie example. I bought a house, and the realtor told me there is a ghost down in the basement, and if you go there, if you're alone, and if it is a night, then ghost will appear. In any other case, you are fine. Am I really willing to take a risk because of my curiosity if I'm alone at night and I need something from the basement? Will I really go down there to see? I will not, because I'm afraid of dark a bit. The other examples is a holiday in Serbia called Zadušnice. Zadušnice is something like Halloween, but much more. So Zadušnice. Zadušnice are most ridiculed holiday in Serbia, because on that day we have people going to graves of their deceased loved ones, and then they spend some time there. But that looks fine. But that's not all. There is something more of it. On Zadušnice, people treat graves like buffets. They put all kind of food on the grave, and then they eat that food there, and they spend some time on the graveyard. But this seems ridiculous, and people are really criticizing Zadušnice because of the superstition. It became a meme in Serbia. But I think that there is a strong therapeutical moment here for people who are a part of that holiday, because it's really visceral. You are standing next to the grave of your deceased loved one. That's a day designated to remembering something about your loved ones that deceased. And the viscerality of eating food and remembering something, it must be strange bodily experience, and the intensity of it cannot be compared to day-to-day remembrance of something. So I think that Zadušnice might not be so bad. And in this morbidly way, I will finish my presentation.
Yeah, this is very interesting. And I was kind of wondering when you first introduced Apophenia, which I wasn't familiar with, because you started by saying it has to do with finding meaning in random events. But then it seemed to me you then moved on to what I've always thought to be the crucial point about superstition, and it's especially why people like Aquinas and Luther didn't like it, is this business of mistaking correlation for causation. Right? Because if you look at their definitions, right, if you look at the two religious guys' definitions of superstition, it's the simulation of the true, right? It's something that looks true, but really isn't true, right? Because you haven't gone deep enough. And if you look in the philosophy of science literature, right, when we have examples of superstition, it's usually as kind of a false causation notion where you come up with something like a rain dance, right? Malinowski originally came up with this, and this is the example that gets trotted out, right, where there is a correlation, perhaps, right, between the rain dance and rain happening, right, but that's not the cause. And to believe otherwise, right, to believe the correlation is causation is the root superstition, right? It's kind of where superstition comes from. And so I'm wondering, so I would think that, you know, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I'm kind of wondering, though, when you started off by saying it was random events that have meaning, isn't that too broad? Right? Too broad for the notion of superstition? Superstition is actually a somewhat narrower concept?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Regarding causation, I don't know anything about causation. By associative learning, I can, you know, recognize a correlation between two events that co-occurred. And that's important for me because I think not causation, but correlation is the important thing for our survival. And regarding random events, yeah, I don't think they are random. And I think apophenia is really important for science. There is scientific apophenia. I'm actually looking through the telescope on the surface of Mars. And if there are some roots, canals in a, you know, a rectangle shape, I will think, oh, it's intelligent life, maybe. So it's not random, yeah, because I was already looking there, and that kind of, you know, abundance of data has its own framework, and that framework is my interest, my motivation to look at something. So
just one point about the business of the scientific apophenia, okay? You may know about this. I'm sure some people in the room know about this, right? There's this famous commencement address that the physicist Richard Feynman gave at Caltech in the 1970s, right? Cargo cult science, right? And it was basically about fields of inquiry, and it wasn't clear just how many sciences he was trying to implicate, certainly social science, but maybe others as well, that in a sense think that they can become sciences by imitating the trappings of science. Right. You know, like talking a lot about methodology all the time and things like that. Right. And this was a kind of, you know, this was a kind of superstitious approach to science. That, namely, if you talk enough like a positivist, you become a scientist after a while. Right. A sort of performative theory of science, you might say. And I'm just wondering, was that part of what you had in mind when you talked about scientific apophenia?
No, actually, I didn't know about.
No, you got to watch out because it might creep into your papers.
I actually had in mind the actual case with Mars.
As for the causation, and I'll end it. Actually, the thing is that before Thomas Aquinas, 6th century, I mentioned them yesterday, John and Bartholomeus, 6th century, they said you shouldn't go to magicians or soothsayers and engage in superstition. Not because it doesn't work. It might work. So causation is there, but it will harm your soul. So the thing is that deviates from Thomas Aquinas or scientific view. They believed that it could help you, but it's harmful. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway,
it's absolutely like so. One apophenia, why it can be crucial actually. Why I think it was actually crucial for the discovery or sort of construction of our best physical theory, quantum mechanics. So the key moment of evidence was so-called Balmer lines, spectral lines for the Bohr's model of the atom, because they showed, now we know, that there are actually these jumps, you know, and that the electron can be only at certain orbits multiplied by integers. And the key to that, so there were other models, but his model actually predicted the Balmer lines, right? Who was Balmer? And what were the Balmer lines? So the spectral analysis was completely separate from the theories of the microphysical world. And it was basically numerology. because you got some lines and you needed people to find some patterns that they can express numerically. Ballmer's actually occupation officially was numerologist. And he was, doing numerological studies for different purposes. He actually came up with particular pattern that he saw. Everybody thought, well, it may be useful for something with just numerology, It's kind of, he's good in apophenia, but who cares? And Bohr actually looked at that as well. And he actually understood that that's actually evidence for his model. So, that might be one example where apophenia, it's really borderline case where it turns into science.